Princess Isabella had always been told that servants should be invisible, mere shadows moving through the grand halls of nobility, seen but never truly noticed. But as she guided Prince Adrian's trembling hand to her face in the flickering candlelight of his chamber, she realized that some rules weren't just meant to be broken, they were meant to be shattered completely. The ancient castle of Valeria had become her gilded prison for 3 long, agonizing months. Ever since her father's once prosperous kingdom fell to the ravages of war, she had been forced to transform from princess to servant, trading silk gowns for rough wool dresses and a crown for calloused hands. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had once commanded armies and negotiated treaties, now scrubbed floors and served meals to nobles who looked through her as if she were made of air. Nobody in this foreign castle knew she carried royal blood in her veins. To everyone else, she was simply Bella, a quiet, unremarkable girl who appeared one day seeking work with mysterious eyes that held depths no servant should possess. She had perfected the art of invisibility, keeping her head down, her voice soft, her true identity buried beneath layers of carefully constructed humility. But Prince Adrian was different. He couldn't see her torn dress or her work-roughened hands. All he knew was her voice, gentle and melodic, unlike the other servants who spoke to him with that particular tone reserved for the afflicted. When she spoke, he heard intelligence, kindness, and something else he couldn't quite identify, something that made his heart race in ways he'd never experienced. The prince had been blind since birth, a cruel twist of fate for someone born to rule. At 25, he had never seen a sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, never looked into a woman's eyes and watched them sparkle with laughter, never witnessed the beauty that everyone else took for granted. His world existed in perpetual darkness, but over the years, he had learned to navigate it through sound, touch, and an almost supernatural instinct that seemed to compensate for his missing sight. Despite his disability, or perhaps because of it, Adrian possessed a gentleness that was rare among royalty. He never raised his voice in anger, never dismissed anyone with cruelty, and somehow always seemed to know when someone was suffering. The servants whispered that he had a gift, that his blindness had opened other senses, allowing him to see into people's souls. That particular evening, as Isabella brought his dinner on a silver tray that had once graced tables in her own castle, something was terribly wrong. The prince sat hunched at the edge of his 4-poster bed, his usually perfect posture crumbling under some invisible weight. His hands shook as if he were fighting an internal battle, and his breathing came in short, labored gasps. "Your Highness," she whispered, setting the tray down on the ornate table near the window. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Are you unwell? Shall I call for the physician?" Adrian's head snapped up at the sound of her voice, and she could see relief wash over his features. "Bella," he said, and her heart clenched at the way he spoke her false name, with such trust, such genuine affection. His voice cracked with barely contained pain. "I need you to help me with something. But you must promise me, swear to me on whatever you hold most sacred, that you will never tell another living soul what transpires in this room tonight." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. In the 3 months she had served him, bringing his meals and occasionally reading to him from the books he could never see, Prince Adrian had always maintained perfect royal composure. Even when struggling with his blindness, he carried himself with dignity and grace. Now he sounded desperate, almost frightened, and the vulnerability in his voice made her want to reach out and comfort him. "I promise," she said without hesitation, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "Whatever you need, Your Highness, I will help you." The prince stood slowly, moving with the careful precision of someone who had mapped every inch of his private chambers. He walked toward a large wooden chest in the far corner of his room, his fingers trailing along the stone wall for guidance. The chest was ornate, carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering candlelight. His hands moved across its surface with practiced familiarity until he found what appeared to be a completely seamless section of wood. Isabella watched in fascination as his fingers pressed against an invisible latch, and the chest opened with the softest whisper of hinges. "Every night for the past 15 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I must take a specific medicine." The court physicians prepared dozens of different tonics and elixirs, all designed to manage my condition. But tonight, I cannot identify the correct bottle in the darkness. They all feel identical to my touch, and if I take the wrong one, he trailed off, but the implications hung heavy in the air. Isabella stepped closer, her curiosity overcoming her caution. Then she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Inside the chest were indeed dozens of small glass bottles, each filled with liquids of different colors: deep emerald green, rich sapphire blue, warm amber gold. But what truly stole her breath wasn't the medicine. It was the letters. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all written in the most elaborate script she had ever seen. The ink seemed to shimmer and dance, catching light that didn't exist, glowing with an ethereal radiance that made her eyes water just looking at it. "Your Highness," Isabella breathed, unable to keep the wonder from her voice, "these letters, they are glowing." Prince Adrian went completely still, as if her words had turned him to stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "You can see them glowing?" "Yes," she whispered, reaching out tentatively toward one of the letters. "The writing looks like starlight captured on paper, like moonbeams made solid." The prince turned toward her, so quickly that she startled backward. His sightless eyes were wide with something between desperate hope and absolute terror. "Bella," he said slowly, each word carefully measured, "I must tell you something that could get us both killed. I am not merely blind due to some accident of birth. I am cursed." Isabella felt the world tilt around her. "Cursed? How?" Adrian moved closer to her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the subtle scent of sandalwood that seemed to cling to his clothes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of hidden pain. 15 years ago, when I was just 10 years old, a woman came to our kingdom seeking shelter. She was clearly a traveler, dusty from the road, her clothes torn and patched, her hair wild from wind and weather. But there was something about her eyes. They held knowledge that seemed older than the castle itself. Isabella listened with growing dread as Adrian continued. "My father, King Aldric, was holding court that day. The woman approached the throne and begged for sanctuary, claiming that she was being pursued by those who would do her harm. She offered to serve the kingdom in exchange for protection, said she had skills that could benefit us all." "What happened?" Isabella asked, though she feared she already knew. "My father took one look at her, her poor clothes, her unkempt appearance, her lack of obvious wealth or noble bearing, and had her thrown out of the castle. He declared that Valeria had no need for beggars and vagrants, that we would not lower ourselves to harbor every wandering soul who appeared at our gates." Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Isabella could see the pain the memory still caused him. As the guards dragged her away, she turned back to look at my father one last time. Her eyes, God help me, her eyes burned with such fury that I felt it even from across the great hall. She raised one trembling finger and spoke a curse that I can still hear echoing in my nightmares. Isabella waited, barely breathing, as Adrian gathered himself to continue. She said, "Aldric of Valeria, you have shown me that your heart is closed to those who suffer. In return, your bloodline will know suffering. Your firstborn son will live in eternal darkness until he finds someone who can see magic itself, someone who can read the language of the heart made manifest. Only then will he understand what you have cost him. Isabella felt ice form in her veins. And that someone is you, Adrian finished, his voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. Those letters in the chest, they are written in ancient magical script. For 15 years I have tested every person who entered this castle. I show them the letters, hoping desperately that anyone might be able to read them. Every single time, they see nothing but blank parchment. Isabella looked back at the chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. The letters pulsed with that strange silver light, and she could read the elegant script as clearly as if it were written in her native tongue. "They are love letters," she whispered, in amazement, her voice filled with awe. "Someone has written you the most beautiful love letters I have ever seen." Prince Adrian's face went completely pale. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no sound emerged. Finally, he managed to whisper, "What do they say?" Isabella picked up the first letter with trembling hands, afraid that her touch might somehow break whatever magic allowed her to see it. As she began to read, her voice grew softer and more emotional with each word. "My dearest Adrian," she began, and already tears were forming in her eyes. "Though you cannot see my face, I see your soul more clearly than I have ever seen anything in this world. Every day I watch you from afar, my heart breaking and soaring in equal measure. I watch you show kindness to servants who expect nothing from you. I watch you listen with genuine interest to problems that other nobles would dismiss. I watch you navigate your darkness with such grace that you illuminate the lives of everyone around you." Isabella paused, overwhelmed by the emotion in the words, then continued, "You are more beautiful than any man who has ever drawn breath, not because of your face or your form, but because of the magnificence of your heart. Your blindness has not made you bitter or cruel as it might have done to a lesser soul. Instead, it has made you infinitely gentle with those who suffer, endlessly patient with those who struggle, and somehow more capable of love than anyone I have ever known." She looked up to see tears streaming down Adrian's face, his expression a mixture of joy and heartbreak. "There's more," she whispered, looking back at the letter. "I love you not for your title or your wealth or your position. I love you for the way you pause to listen when someone is speaking, really listen, as if their words are the most important thing in the world. I love you for the way you never raise your voice in anger, even when others would be justified in their fury. I love you for your laugh, rare as it is, and for the way you find beauty in music and poetry and all the things that don't require sight to appreciate." Isabella's voice broke as she read the final lines. "I love you for your heart, my darling Adrian, not for your eyes. If I could take your darkness into myself and give you my sight, I would do so without hesitation, forever and always yours. Your secret admirer." As the last words left Isabella's lips, something extraordinary began to happen. A warm, golden light started to emanate from the letters themselves, growing brighter and more radiant with each passing second. The light spread outward, filling every corner of the chamber, banishing shadows that had existed there for years. Prince Adrian gasped, his hands flying to his face. "I can see light," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "For the first time in my entire life, I can actually see light." Isabella looked at him and felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes, which had always been clouded and unfocused, were now clear and bright. But more miraculous than that, they were looking directly at her, seeing her for the first time. The prince reached out with shaking hands to touch her face, his fingers trailing across her cheek as if he couldn't quite believe what his newly awakened eyes were showing him. You are so beautiful, he breathed, his voice filled with reverence. More beautiful than I ever dared to imagine, more lovely than every dream I've ever had. But Isabella stepped back, fear suddenly replacing the joy that had filled her heart moments before. The weight of her deception crashed down on her like a physical blow. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice shaking, "I must tell you something. I am not who you think I am." Adrian's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I am not a servant," she said, tears streaming down her face as the words tumbled out. "I have been lying to you from the moment we met. I am Princess Isabella of Astoria. My kingdom fell to war 3 months ago, and I have been hiding here, working as a servant to survive. Everything you know about me is a lie." Prince Adrian stared at her in stunned silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, incredibly, a smile began to spread across his face. Not the polite smile of royalty, but a genuine expression of pure joy. "You have been royal this entire time?" he asked, and she could hear laughter bubbling up in his voice. "Yes," she whispered, shame coloring her words. "I deceived you. I made you care for someone who doesn't even exist." "My darling girl," Prince Adrian said, his voice warm with love and amusement. "Do you truly not understand what this means?" Isabella looked at him in confusion, unable to comprehend how he could be laughing when she had just confessed to such a terrible betrayal. "The curse," Adrian explained gently, "could only be broken by someone of noble blood who truly loved me for who I am, not for my title or my wealth or my position. You loved me when you thought I was just a blind prince who needed help. You saw my soul before you ever saw my face. You cared for me when you had every reason to focus only on your own survival." Isabella felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest, but then reality crashed back down around her. "But the letters," she said desperately. "Someone else wrote those letters. Someone else loves you." Prince Adrian smiled and reached into the chest, pulling out another letter. He handed it to her with gentle hands. "Read the signature again," he said softly. Isabella looked down at the bottom of the parchment, and her heart nearly stopped. There, in the same glowing script, were the words, "Forever and always yours, Isabella of Astoria." "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wrote these letters. I've never even seen this ink before." "Magic works in ways that mortal minds can barely comprehend," Prince Adrian said gently, taking her hands in his. "Perhaps your heart wrote them, even if your hand did not. Perhaps your love for me was so strong, so pure, that it reached across time and space to find me, to comfort me during the darkest moments of my cursed existence." As he spoke, the letters in the chest began to fade, their magical purpose fulfilled, but the golden light in the room continued to grow brighter, surrounding both Isabella and Adrian in its warm, protective glow. "There is something else I must confess," Prince Adrian said, his newly seeing eyes twinkling with mischief. "Now that the curse is broken and we are sharing our secrets, I can tell you mine." "What secret?" Isabella asked, though she wasn't sure she could handle any more revelations. "I knew you were not a servant from the very first day you arrived at our castle," he admitted with a grin that was both sheepish and proud. Isabella's mouth fell open in shock. "You knew? Your voice, your manner of speaking, the way you carried yourself even when you thought no one was watching. Everything about you proclaimed your noble birth. You can disguise your clothes and your circumstances, my dear, but you cannot disguise a lifetime of education and refinement." "Then why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her mind reeling. "Because I also knew you were hiding for a reason," he replied seriously. "Your eyes held pain and loss that spoke of recent tragedy. I assumed you were a noble who had fallen on hard times and needed sanctuary. I pretended not to know because I wanted you to feel safe, to trust me when you were ready." Isabella stared at him in amazement. So you fell in love with Princess Isabella, who was pretending to be a servant? I fell in love with your courage, Adrian said, his voice filled with deep emotion. I fell in love with your kindness toward others, even when you yourself had lost everything. I fell in love with your strength, your intelligence, your willingness to help a blind prince navigate his darkness. As they stood there in the golden light, Isabella realized that both of them had been living with secrets, both trapped by circumstances beyond their control. But together they had found a way to break free from the curses, both magical and mundane, that had bound them. What happens now? She asked, hardly daring to hope. Prince Adrian's eyes sparkled as he looked at her, still marveling at the miraculous gift of sight. Now, he said, reaching up to cup her face in his hands, we write our own story, not as a blind prince and a servant girl, but as two people who found love in the darkness and brought light to each other's world. But their moment of perfect happiness was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor outside Adrian's chamber. Someone was coming, and they were moving with obvious urgency and purpose. Hide, Prince Adrian whispered urgently, his protective instincts overriding his joy. If someone finds you here at this hour, in my private chambers, they will assume the worst. Your reputation will be destroyed. Isabella started to move toward the large wardrobe in the corner, but it was already too late. The heavy wooden door burst open with a crash, and Prince Adrian's younger brother, Prince Marcus, strode into the room with 3 armed guards behind him. Marcus was everything Adrian was not. Tall where Adrian was average height, dark where Adrian was fair, and possessed of a cruel ambition that had always made Isabella uncomfortable during the few times she had encountered him in the castle corridors. "Brother," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern and barely concealed satisfaction. "I see your sight has returned. How remarkably convenient." Prince Adrian immediately stepped protectively in front of Isabella, though he knew it was futile to try to hide her presence now. "Marcus," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "what is the meaning of this intrusion? Why do you come to my chambers with armed guards?" "The meaning," Marcus replied, his cold smile growing wider, "is that I have been waiting 15 long years for you to break that pathetic curse. Do you have any idea why I would be so interested in your magical recovery?" "Enlighten me," Adrian said, though Isabella could hear the dread creeping into his voice. "Because, dear brother," Marcus said with obvious relish, "the witch who cursed you so many years ago made a deal with me. A bargain that I have been anticipating for over a decade." Isabella felt ice form in her veins as Marcus continued his revelation. "She told me that when your curse was finally broken, it would not simply disappear. Oh no, that would be far too simple, far too merciful. Instead, the curse would transfer to whoever was responsible for breaking it. Your precious servant girl will now live in darkness for the rest of her miserable life." Isabella watched in horror as the golden light in the room began to flicker and dim. She could feel shadows starting to creep in from the edges of her vision, just as Marcus had predicted. "But that is not the most delicious part of my plan," Marcus continued, clearly enjoying their terror. "The witch also told me that the person who breaks the curse will only be able to see for exactly 1 hour. After that they will be blind forever, and their sight will be transferred to the person who betrays them." Prince Adrian spun around to look at Isabella, his eyes wide with horror and desperate love. "No," he whispered fiercely, "I will not let this happen to you. I will find a way to stop this." "You have no choice," Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the golden light. "The magic is already at work. Look at her eyes, brother. Do you see how they are beginning to cloud over, just as yours did all those years ago?" Isabella touched her face with trembling fingers, and realized with growing terror that Marcus was right. The world was growing dimmer around her, shadows creeping steadily inward, like a living thing intent on devouring her sight. "There has to be a way to reverse this," she said desperately, fighting against the encroaching darkness. "Oh, there is," Marcus replied with malicious glee. "The curse can be transferred again, but only through an act of ultimate betrayal. One of you must completely betray the other's trust. Then the curse will move to the betrayer, and the betrayed will be free." Prince Adrian immediately grabbed Isabella's hands, his grip desperate and fierce. "I will betray you," he said with absolute conviction. "I will do whatever it takes to save your sight. I have lived in darkness before. I can do it again." "No," Isabella protested, her voice breaking. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me. You have already spent 25 years blind. I won't be responsible for sending you back into that darkness." "Listen to me," Adrian said urgently, his voice growing more desperate as her vision continued to fade. "You have already lost one kingdom, one family, one entire life. I will not let you lose your sight as well." But Isabella, even as darkness crept closer, had an idea. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, but it might be their only chance to turn the tables on Marcus and his cruel machinations. "Marcus," she said, turning toward the prince's brother with more confidence than she felt. "You said the curse transfers through betrayal. But what if the real betrayer in this room is you?" Marcus frowned, clearly not understanding where she was leading. Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger even as her sight grew weaker. "You claim the witch made a deal with you, but I don't believe that's the truth. You've been working with her all along, haven't you? This entire curse, Adrian's blindness, the timing of everything, it's all been part of your plan to steal the throne." "That's ridiculous," Marcus sputtered, but Isabella could hear the lie in his voice, could sense his sudden nervousness. "Is it?" she challenged. "Prove your innocence then. If you're telling the truth about the witch approaching you, if you really are just an innocent bystander in all this, then you should be able to touch one of those magical letters without any consequences." She gestured toward the chest, where a few letters still glowed with faint magical light. "The letters can only be touched safely by someone with a pure heart, someone with genuine love and good intentions. If you've been plotting against your brother, if you've been working to keep him blind so you could inherit the throne, the magic will burn you." Marcus hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that she was right. Prince Adrian, even with his own vision beginning to fade as the hour of clear sight drew to a close, saw his brother's fear and understood. "You have been planning this," Adrian said, his voice cold with a fury. Isabella had never heard from him before. "All these years you've been working to ensure I remained blind. You want father to name you as heir because you believe a blind man cannot rule. So what if I have?" Marcus snapped, his careful facade finally cracking completely. "You think you deserve to rule just because you happen to be born first? You've been blind your entire life. How can someone who cannot even see his own kingdom possibly lead it?" "But I am not blind anymore," Adrian replied quietly, his voice deadly calm. "And now, for the first time, I can see you clearly. I can see exactly what kind of man you really are." As the truth was finally revealed, something magical and terrible began to happen. The curse, which fed on deception and betrayal, suddenly recognized who the real villain was in this story. It turned away from Isabella and Adrian like a living thing, rushing toward Marcus instead. The shadows that had been creeping over Isabella's vision suddenly reversed course, streaming toward Marcus like dark water. He stumbled backward in terror as the curse wrapped around him like chains made of pure darkness. "No," he screamed, his voice breaking with panic. This is not how it was supposed to happen. The curse should transfer to her, but it was too late. The curse, finally understanding who had been manipulating it all along, claimed its true target. Marcus's eyes went blank and sightless, and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious but breathing. Isabella felt her vision return completely, clearer and brighter than it had ever been. The golden light in the room blazed like a miniature sun, and Prince Adrian's sight remained perfect and strong. "Is it over?" she whispered, afraid to hope. "It is over," Adrian confirmed, pulling her into his arms and holding her as if he would never let her go. "The curse has found its rightful owner." The guards who had accompanied Marcus looked at each other in confusion and growing fear. Without their leader's orders, they had no idea what they should do. "Leave us," Prince Adrian commanded, his voice carrying an authority that Isabella had never heard before. "Take my brother to the physicians and see that he is cared for. He will live, but he is no longer a threat to anyone." The guards hurried to obey, lifting Marcus's unconscious form and carrying him from the chamber. Alone at last, Adrian and Isabella held each other in the golden light, both of them finally free from curses, free from secrets, and free to love each other openly and completely. "What will happen to Marcus?" Isabella asked, though she found it difficult to feel much sympathy for him. "He will live," Adrian replied thoughtfully, "but he will be blind, just as I was for so many years. Perhaps in the darkness, he will learn the compassion and humility he never found in the light. Perhaps suffering will teach him what privilege never could." "And what happens to us now?" she asked, looking up into his clear, loving eyes. Prince Adrian smiled and took her hands in his, bringing them to his lips to kiss her fingertips gently. "We get married," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We unite our kingdoms, your restored Astoria and my Valeria. We rule together as equals with both love and sight to guide us toward justice and peace." But your fool, Isabella worried, the practical part of her mind already jumping ahead to potential obstacles. "Will he accept me? I am from a fallen kingdom, and I have been working as a servant in his castle. My father has been searching for a way to break my curse for 15 years, Adrian replied confidently. "He has consulted with physicians, scholars, wise women, and traveling mystics. He has offered rewards, made bargains, and prayed to every god whose name he knows. When he learns that you were the key to my freedom, that your love was what saved his son and heir, he will welcome you not just as a daughter, but as a miracle." As if summoned by their very words, the chamber door opened once again. This time it was King Aldrich himself who entered, accompanied by Queen Elena. Both of them stopped dead in their tracks when they saw their eldest son's clear, bright eyes looking directly at them. "Adrian," Queen Elena whispered, tears immediately streaming down her face. "You can see, after all these years, you can finally see." "I can see, Mother," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want you both to meet the woman who gave me back my sight, and so much more. This is Princess Isabella of Astoria." Isabella immediately curtsied deeply, but King Aldrich gently raised her up with his own hands, his expression filled with wonder and gratitude. "Princess Isabella," he said solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of royal decree, "your kingdom may have fallen in battle, but you will rise again stronger than before. If you will consent to have my son, I would be deeply honored to call you my daughter and to welcome you as the future Queen of Valeria." Isabella looked up at Prince Adrian, her heart overflowing with love and hope, and a future that seemed almost too good to be true. "I will have him," she said, her voice clear and strong, "and I will love him faithfully for the rest of my life." As the royal family embraced, The golden light that had filled Adrian's chamber began to spread throughout the entire castle. Servants stopped their work to stare in wonder as warm, magical light danced through the corridors like living joy. Guards found themselves smiling for the first time in years. Even the horses in the stables seemed to sense that something wonderful and transformative had occurred. The curse was not just broken, it had been transformed into something beautiful, something that would bless the kingdom for generations to come. And so Prince Adrian and Princess Isabella's story moved toward its perfect conclusion, a tale of love conquering not just blindness, but betrayal, deception, and the very darkness itself. Their wedding would be celebrated throughout both kingdoms, their reign would be marked by wisdom and compassion, and their love would become the stuff of legends. But that, as they say, is another story entirely. The sound of splintering wood echoed across the frozen harbor as Prince Magnus Eriksson plunged through the ice. His golden hair disappeared beneath the black water, while his warriors stood frozen in horror. From the slave quarters, Sarah watched her world shatter. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden. Slaves who drew attention died slowly and painfully in Jorvik. But when Magnus's desperate hand broke the surface one final time, something deeper than fear took hold. Without thought, she sprinted across the dock, bare feet slipping on ice, and dove into the killing cold. The water hit like 1,000 knives. Her lungs seized, muscles locked in protest. But she fought toward the sinking prince, defying not just death's pull, but every law that had kept her chained since birth. Their eyes met underwater, his wide with shock, hers burning with determination. In that moment, slave and prince became simply two souls fighting death together. Sarah pressed against the cold stone wall of the slave quarters, watching through a crack as Viking warriors prepared their longships for winter storage. Her breath fogged in the bitter air as she studied their movements, memorizing patterns that might one day save her life. Born in this settlement to a Saxon slave who died birthing her, Sarah had known 18 winters of servitude. She scrubbed floors, tended fires, and perfected the art of invisibility that kept slaves alive under Viking rule. But unlike the others, Sarah carried secrets. Her mother had taught her letters before dying, and the old cook had whispered stories of distant lands where people chose their own fates. Sarah, Astrid's harsh voice cut through her thoughts. The house mistress stood in the doorway, weathered face stern with authority. Stop daydreaming. The prince returns tonight. Prince Magnus Eriksson. Even his name sent whispers through the settlement, like wind through wheat. At 25, the Jarl's son had already led 3 successful raids, bringing wealth and glory to their people. Tall, strong, feared in battle. Everything a Viking prince should be. He was also the only Viking who had ever looked at her as if she were human. Last summer she'd been scrubbing the great hall when he entered, exhausted from training. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Instead of the usual dismissal or hunger she saw in Viking eyes, she found something else. Curiosity. Perhaps kindness. The moment passed quickly, but that brief connection had haunted her since. The prince brings Danish nobles, Astrid continued. Important guests who could become powerful allies. Everything must be perfect, or you'll feel the lash. Sarah nodded silently and hurried to the kitchens where other slaves prepared the feast. Roasted meats, fresh bread, imported wine worth more than their lives. As evening painted the sky crimson, the great hall filled with firelight and celebration. Hidden in shadows, Sarah served the feast, trying to remain invisible among the boisterous Vikings. Prince Magnus sat at the high table, golden hair catching firelight like spun metal. His deep blue tunic bore silver embroidery, and arm rings proclaimed his victories. Yet despite the luxury surrounding him, Sarah noticed something in his eyes, a loneliness that all the wealth in the world couldn't fill. The Danish guests proved crude men who drank heavily and spoke louder with each cup. Their leader, Jarl Sven, was massive with cruel eyes and hands that grabbed at every slave girl who passed. "Your father grows old, Magnus," Sven said, his voice carrying across the hall like a challenge. "Perhaps younger blood should lead. I have 3 ships, 100 warriors. Together we could take whatever we wanted." Magnus's jaw tightened visibly. "My father rules here. I serve his will." "How noble." Sven's laugh held no warmth, but nobility doesn't fill treasure chests. The Saxon kingdoms weaken daily. Irish monasteries overflow with gold. Why waste time with honor when power waits for the taking? Sarah saw the prince's hands clench around his drinking horn, duty warring with ambition, honor fighting opportunity. The night grew wilder as Danes became more drunk and aggressive. Sarah tried staying hidden, but as she refilled cups, Jarl Sven's massive hand shot out, gripping her wrist with crushing force. "What have we here?" His breath reeked of ale and decay. "A pretty slave. Come sit with me, girl." Terror froze her blood. She tried pulling away, but his grip was iron. Around the hall, Vikings laughed or ignored her plight. The strong taking from the weak, as the world had always worked. "Please, my lord," she whispered. "I must serve the other guests." "You'll serve me first." His other hand reached for her dress ties. "Release her." The command cut through noise like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward Prince Magnus, who had risen from his seat, hand resting on his sword hilt, blue eyes burning with cold fire. Sven laughed. "Just a slave boy. Surely you're not attached to this one." "I said release her." The hall fell silent enough to hear breathing. A prince defending a slave violated every law and custom. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Sven's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you challenging me over property?" "I'm telling you to release what belongs to this house." The words carried deeper meaning, protection, perhaps even care. After a long moment where violence hung thick as smoke, Sven released her with disgust. "Keep your pet then. But remember, weakness is a luxury kings cannot afford." Sarah stumbled back into shadows, wrist aching from Sven's grip, but her heart ached worse. The prince had protected her at terrible cost. She'd seen the looks exchanged between Danish guests, doubt planted about Magnus's fitness to rule. Later, as she cleaned the emptied hall, she found Prince Magnus standing alone by the great hearth. Firelight danced across his strong features, highlighting the burden he carried. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, not turning. "No, my lord. Thank you." "You don't need to thank me." His voice sounded tired, older than his years. "What's your name?" "Sarah, my lord." "Siri," he repeated it softly, testing the sound. "It means bright star in the old tongue. Your mother chose well." Surprise flickered through her. Most Vikings cared nothing for slave names or their meanings. "You have intelligent eyes," he continued. "Brave ones. Not many would dare meet my gaze, as you did last summer." Heat flooded her cheeks. He remembered. "My lord, I shouldn't." "No, you shouldn't." He finally turned, and the weight in his eyes made her breath catch. "But then, I shouldn't have defended you tonight. We both seem prone to doing things we shouldn't." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. For a heartbeat stretching toward eternity, the gulf between slave and prince disappeared entirely. Then reality crashed back. Sarah dropped her gaze, curtsying deeply. "Forgive me, my lord. I know my place. Do you?" His voice held strange gentleness. Sometimes I wonder if any of us truly know our place in this world. He left her standing alone by dying embers, her heart pounding with dangerous hope. 3 mornings later, Prince Magnus stood on the harbour wall watching his breath mist in cold air. Jarl Svander's words haunted him. Weakness is a luxury kings cannot afford. His father was indeed aging. Grey had conquered Eric's hair completely. His hands sometimes trembled, and long counsels exhausted him. Other Jarls had noticed. Whispers spoke of coming challenges, tests determining who would rule when Eric could no longer lift his sword. Magnus knew he should be planning, building alliances, gathering warriors, proving strength through conquest. Instead, he thought of a slave girl with brave eyes and an unbreakable spirit. "You look troubled, my son." Magnus turned to find his father approaching, wrapped in thick fur against morning's bite, even stooped with age. Erik Erikson commanded respect through presence alone. "The Danes made interesting offers," Magnus said carefully. "Savan is ambitious, useful if controlled, dangerous if not." Erik joined him at the wall. "What did you think of his proposals?" "Rich rewards, but greater risks. The Saxon kingdoms maintain strong armies. The Irish High King has Scottish alliances. Conquest wouldn't come easily." Erik nodded, approvingly. "Wisdom. But young warriors grow restless during long winters, dreaming of gold and glory. Unsatisfied dreams become dangerous. Then we plan smaller raids come spring. Coastal settlements with weaker defenses. Build gradually rather than risk everything." "Good." Erik's sharp eyes missed nothing, despite his years. "But something else troubles you. Something beyond war plans." Magnus felt heat rise in his cheeks. His father had always read him too easily. "I saw the feast," Erik continued quietly, "with the slave girl." Magnus's heart sank. "Father, you showed honor. Good. But also interest. Dangerous." They stood in silence, watching mist rise from harbor waters like ghosts. "Tell me about her," Erik said finally. The question surprised Magnus. "She's different, intelligent, educated somehow. Her mother must have taught her letters. Beautiful." Magnus couldn't deny it. "Yes." Erik sighed deeply. "Beauty and intelligence in a slave, dangerous for any man, especially a prince who must marry for alliance." "I know my duty," Magnus said stiffly. "Do you?" "The Danish princess arrives in 3 days. Sprum's daughter, your future bride if we're to seal this alliance." The words hit, like physical blows. Magnus had known this day would come, but wasn't prepared for how much reality would hurt. When he managed. "The marriage feast before winter solstice. It shows strength to enemies, binds Sven's warriors to our cause." Magnus gripped stone until his knuckles whitened. "If I refuse, then Sven finds another ally. Young Olaf from northern settlements has ships, men, and has made his own offers to our rivals." Erik's voice grew grave. "We need this alliance. Our enemies strengthen while we debate. The choice is simple. Marry the girl, secure our future, or watch everything crumble." "Simple for you." Erik's hand fell heavily on his shoulder. "You think it was simple for me? I loved your mother desperately, but married for alliance. Love came later, growing from respect and shared purpose. Perhaps the same awaits you. And the slave remains a slave. Unless," Erik paused thoughtfully. "Unless what?" "There's an old custom. If a slave saves their master's life, they can be granted freedom. Perhaps elevated to free status if the service proves great enough." Magnus frowned. "But she's done nothing to..." Yet, Erik's weathered face held secrets. Opportunities have ways of presenting themselves to those who watch. With those cryptic words, the old Jarl departed, leaving Magnus alone with his thoughts and growing certainty his father was planning something. In the slave quarters, Sarah faced her own crisis. News of the prince's engagement had spread like wildfire. Other slaves whispered with mixed excitement and fear. "A Danish princess," said old Greta, who'd served 30 years, beautiful with golden hair and a dowry of silver and warriors. "The prince will be happy," young Helga added, still dreaming of romance despite slavery. "What man wouldn't want such a bride?" Scylla remained silent, but her heart felt crushed in a giant's fist. She had no right to this pain. The prince stood far above her station. She'd always known their connection was hopeless. But knowing and accepting were different creatures entirely. That evening, serving in the great hall, she noticed Prince Magnus barely touched his food. He sat stiffly at the high table, offering short, distracted responses. His eyes never once sought the shadows where she worked. After the meal, cleaning tables, she found a small parchment scroll tucked under his drinking cup. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The harbor. Midnight. Come alone. Though unsigned, she recognized his handwriting from documents she'd glimpsed. Every instinct screamed to burn the message and forget it existed. Meeting the prince secretly went beyond dangerous discovery, meant slow, painful death for her, ruined reputation for him. But as midnight approached, she crept through darkened streets. The night was clear and bitter, stars scattered across black silk sky like diamonds. She found him at the longest dock's end, cloak wrapped tight against wind. For a moment she almost fled. This was madness. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning. "I shouldn't have." "No, you shouldn't." He faced her then, starlight revealing torment in his eyes. "But I'm glad you did." They stood apart, both knowing they dared not move closer. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the Danish princess?" "Yes, the marriage happens in 3 days." Simple words shattered something inside her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Sarah," he said her name like a prayer. "If things were different, but they're not." She forced strength into her voice. "You're a prince, I'm a slave. No path exists between our worlds, doesn't there?" He stepped closer, and she could smell wool, leather, pine soap. "My father spoke of old customs. Freedom earned through great service. What service could I possibly provide? I don't know, but perhaps fate will provide opportunity." His hand reached toward her face, almost touching before falling away. The space between them burned with unspoken longing. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. But neither moved. A night bird called across water, breaking the spell. Sarah fled into darkness, leaving Prince Magnus alone with impossible dreams. Princess Astrid Svensdottir arrived like winter storm, beautiful, powerful, and cold. Tall and graceful, with silver gold hair braided with gems, she moved through the great hall as if already its queen. Her silk dress bore the deep blue only royalty afforded. Her jewelry proclaimed wealth enough to buy armies. From shadows, Sarah watched Prince Magnus greet his bride with formal courtesy. Astrid smiled and laughed perfectly, but her eyes constantly evaluated, measuring the hall's wealth, warriors' strength, servants' deference. This woman understood power and intended to wield it. The engagement ceremony that evening forced Sarah to serve while watching Magnus and Astrid exchange rings and ritual words binding their futures. When the princess kissed her betrothed, Sarah felt her own heart being torn away. But worse followed. "You," Princess Astrid's voice cut through celebration. She pointed directly at Sarah. "The dark-haired slave, come here." Every eye turned. Sarah's legs felt like water as she approached and curtsied deeply. Your name? Astrid asked, voice honeyed but blade sharp. Sarah, Your Highness. Such an unusual name for a slave. Almost too pretty, don't you think? Astrid's smile didn't reach her eyes. I've heard interesting stories. They say you can read and write, unusual skills for your station. My mother taught me, Your Highness. How fortunate. And they say you've caught certain household members' attention. The hall fell silent. Everyone understood the implication. Sarah's heart pounded thunderously. I serve faithfully, Your Highness. Nothing more. Of course. Astrid's smile sharpened. But faithful service takes many forms. Perhaps you could demonstrate your literacy. I have documents needing copying, boring but suitable for your particular skills. A trap, but Sarah had no choice. I would be honored to serve. Excellent. Begin tomorrow. Astrid turned away with casual cruelty. But Sarah glimpsed Prince Magnus's face, jaw clenched, eyes burning with suppressed fury. He knew exactly what his bride intended, but stood powerless to intervene. The next morning, reporting to Astrid's chambers, Sarah found the Danish princess already redecorating to suit her tastes. Our learned slave, Astrid said without looking up. How punctual. I appreciate punctuality. The princess's scribe handed Sarah parchments and quill. Copy exactly. Every word, every mark. Sarah began working but soon realized these weren't ordinary documents. They were letters between Astrid and her father discussing post-marriage plans. The old Jarl weakens daily. Once we begin undermining his authority. Magnus is strong but young, easily guided if handled properly. Several younger warriors already hunger for greater raids. Well-placed words could turn them. The settlement's defenses are adequate, but not impregnable. If internal pressure fails, 3 ships arriving unexpectedly could take the harbor during feast. Horror grew as Sarah read. This wasn't just political marriage, it was conquest's first step. Astrid and Savin intended taking control by force if necessary, and Magnus knew nothing. Something wrong? Princess Astrid had moved silently behind her. You seem distracted. No, Your Highness. Just concentrating on accuracy. Good. Accuracy is important with sensitive information. The threat was clear. A faithful slave knows discretion's value. Loose tongues have ways of being cut out. I understand perfectly, Your Highness. Sarah spent the morning copying treasonous letters, each word burning into memory. By dismissal, she knew every detail of the Danish conquest plan. But what could she do? A slave's word meant nothing against a princess. Even if Magnus believed her, confronting his bride based on slave testimony would destroy the alliance, potentially start war. That evening, serving in the Great Hall, she watched Prince Magnus carefully. He performed happiness well, but she saw tension in his shoulders, smiles that never reached his eyes. When he stepped outside for air, she made her decision. The harbor was deserted except for watchmen, but Sarah knew hidden paths between warehouses. She waited in shadows until Magnus passed, then stepped into his path. My lord. He spun, hand going to sword before recognizing her. Sarah, if someone sees, your life is in danger. The words stopped his protests cold. What? Quickly, quietly, she revealed everything from the copied letters. His face darkened with each revelation. You're certain? He asked when she finished. I copied every word. They plan to strike during your wedding feast when everyone's drunk. 3 ships will enter, while Danish warriors inside create chaos. Magnus ran hands through his hair, mind racing. Father needs to know. Will he believe a slave over his ally's daughter? Or think you're avoiding unwanted marriage? Doubt flickered in his eyes. What do you suggest? We need proof beyond my word. Princess Astrid keeps originals locked in her chambers. If we could retrieve them, that's impossible. The risk... I can do it. I know her routines. She takes sleeping draught nightly. Wine with poppy extract. While she sleeps, I could search. Magnus stared in amazement. You'd risk your life. For you? Yes. The words escaped before she could stop them. Something shifted in Magnus's expression. Without thought, he cupped her face in his hands. Sarah, I know it's impossible. He kissed her then, gentle and desperate and heartbreaking. For one perfect moment, the world vanished. No prince, no slave, no impossible barriers. Just two souls finding each other against all odds. When they broke apart, both trembled. I love you, he said, words torn from deep within. God help me, I love you. And I love you, she replied, through tears, which is why I must do this. 2 nights later, Sarah crept toward Astrid's chambers. Her heart hammered as she listened at the door, deep, regular breathing of drugged sleep. The stolen key turned slowly, every sound making her wince. Astrid lay motionless on silk pillows, looking calculating even in sleep. The locked chest sat in the corner, dark oak bound with iron. The key hung on a chain at Astrid's throat, beneath her nightgown. Getting it meant touching the sleeping woman, risking waking her. Moving with infinite care, Sarah approached. Astrid's breathing remained steady. The draft worked well. Sarah slid fingers beneath silk and grasped the key. Astrid stirred, mumbling in Danish. Sarah froze, barely breathing. Then the princess settled back into deep sleep. The chest opened with a soft click. Inside, beneath silk and jewels, lay the letter bundle tied with ribbon. Sarah's hands trembled as she confirmed these were the originals. Looking for something? Blood turned to ice. Behind her, Astrid sat up, not drugged but sharp and alert, eyes glittering with malicious triumph. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Astrid rose gracefully. I've been watching, waiting to see what you'd do. Sarah clutched the letters. These prove your treachery. They prove nothing to people who won't live to read them. A knife glinted in Astrid's hand. You've been useful, actually. Now I have proof that slaves here cannot be trusted. Complete cleansing will be necessary. Magnus will never believe you, won't he? A jealous slave, mad with envy, attempting theft. The evidence will be convincing when they find your body. Sarah back toward the window. People will ask questions about a clumsy slave falling while cleaning. Such accidents happen constantly. Astrid's smile was pure poison. Though I should thank you first. For what? Making this easier. Did you think I'd actually marry that crippled excuse for a prince? The words hit like blows. What? The engagement's real, but marriage? To a man who barely walks, let alone leads warriors? Astrid laughed coldly. We have grander plans. Once Magnus dies tragically defending against raiders, I'll marry his cousin Olaf. The power transition will be seamless. The raiders, you're not conquering, you're destroying. Very good. Yes, father's ships arrive as raiders, not allies. They'll attack during the wedding feast. Most current leadership dies in the surprise, leaving a vacuum for suitable candidates. Innocent people, necessary casualties. You can't build new order without clearing old. Astrid raised the knife. Speaking of which, Sarah didn't wait. She threw herself through the wooden shutters, clutching letters as she fell. The drop was farther than expected. She hit hard, pain shooting through shoulder and ribs. But adrenaline drove her up and running as shouts erupted above. Guards appeared from shadows. cutting off escape routes. They herded her toward the harbor like hunters driving prey. At water's edge, she found herself trapped. "End of the line, slave," the guard captain called. "Hand over what you stole." Sarah looked at the letters, the only proof of conspiracy. If taken, Magnus would die never knowing truth. Making a decision that would change everything, she threw the letters far into harbor waters. "No!" Astrid's scream echoed across the settlement. "Take her alive," the princess ordered, arriving with more guards. "She'll suffer for this." But a new voice cut through darkness. "Stand down." Prince Magnus emerged from shadows with his personal warriors, sword drawn, face terrible with controlled fury. "Magnus!" Astrid immediately switched to innocence. "Thank gods you're here. This slave attacked me, tried stealing." "Enough. I know what she found. I know everything." Astrid's mask slipped momentarily. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Magnus nodded toward the harbor where torches now illuminated 3 Danish longships hidden in morning mist. "My scouts have watched your father's ship since yesterday. They've seen the warriors, weapons, attack preparation." Astrid went white. "You can't prove I was involved. Your correspondence has been enlightening." A bluff, but effective. Without original letters, Magnus had no proof. But Astrid didn't know that. "You're making a terrible mistake," she hissed. "My father has 100 warriors. Against 3 ships? Perhaps not." Magnus smiled grimly. "But father has his own allies. Look behind you." Astrid spun to see torches blazing around the harbor. What seemed like surprise attack was revealed as trap. Eric's warriors had waited in concealment, ready to spring ambush. "Did you think," Eric's voice came from darkness, "that Eric the Farseer's son would be so easily deceived? We've known your treachery for days." The old Jarl emerged, armed despite his age. Behind him came dozens of warriors, surrounding Astrid and her guards. "Impossible." "How?" Eric's eyes found Sarah at water's edge. A faithful servant, risked everything for truth, though the proof she provided went to dramatic lengths for recovery. A small boat appeared with the settlement's best diver, holding a waterproof satchel. "The letters," he called, wrapped in oiled cloth, weighted with stones as suspected, all recovered, still readable. Sarah stared amazed. "You knew I'd throw them?" "I hoped you'd be clever enough to preserve evidence while appearing to destroy it," Magnus replied, "though my heart stopped when you jumped from that window." "You planned everything? From the moment you warned me, father and I have been setting this trap, waiting for them to move." Eric addressed the captured princess. "Lady Astrid, you're guilty of conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against hospitality laws. The penalty is death. You cannot execute me. I'm a princess. There will be war. There would have been war regardless. At least now we face it on our terms." As Astrid was led to imprisonment, Magnus turned to Sarah. In torchlight, his eyes held warmth and something deeper. "You saved us all. At risk of your life, you saved everyone. I couldn't let them hurt you." Eric approached, weathered face thoughtful. "Old laws speak of freedom for slaves who save their master's life. But this goes far beyond. You saved not just my son, but our entire people. Father, such service deserves more than freedom. It deserves recognition." Eric's voice carried across the harbor. "Sarah, daughter of no-name slaves, I declare you free with all rights that entails. More, your courage and wisdom prove you worthy of highest honor. I name you Sarah, Eric's daughter, adopted daughter of my house with dowry rights and noble status." The crowd erupted in cheers. Warriors raised weapons in salute. Even former slaves wept with joy. But Sarah only saw Magnus, looking at her with wonder and love that poets immortalize. "Is this real?" she whispered. "As real as your courage, as real as the love that drove you to save us." But happiness proved short-lived. War horns boomed across water. Jarl Sven had seen his trap reversed and wasn't retreating quietly. "They're attacking anyway," Magnus said grimly as Danish ships moved to assault formation. Eric nodded. "Sven's too proud for defeat. He'll try taking by force what he couldn't take by stealth." The harbor erupted as warriors ran to positions. Sarah found herself swept in chaos, no longer slave, but uncertain of her role as newly declared noble. "Sarah," Magnus caught her arm. "Get to safety with the other women." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I've spent my life watching others fight. Not anymore. I know this settlement better than anyone. Every path, weakness, landing spot. You need that knowledge." He wanted to argue, but saw determination in her face. This wasn't the frightened slave who'd served in silence. "Stay close. If I say run, you run." The first Danish ship struck like a battering ram. Warriors poured over sides with battle cries echoing off water. Eric's forces held prepared positions, but the trap had sprung early. "The North Dock," Sarah called over clashing weapons. "They're trying to land another group away from main fighting." Magnus saw shadows moving in pre-dawn darkness, Danes seeking undefended landing. "Olsen, 20 men to North Dock. Stop that landing." Even as one threat was contained, another emerged. Fire arrows fell from Danish ships, aimed at wooden buildings. If structures caught, the battle would become desperate struggle to save lives, rather than defeat enemies. "The well chains," Sarah said urgently. "If we organize slaves and servants into bucket brigades, do it. You know them best." Sarah ran through the settlement, calling to people she'd worked beside for years. Her new status meant nothing now. What mattered was trust, knowing she'd never ask what she wouldn't do herself. Within minutes, organized lines passed water buckets, dousing flames before they spread. The battle raged on. Danes had established foothold on main dock, pushing inland with desperate fury. "Magnus," Eric's voice carried over din. "The hall. They're flanking through the great hall." Sarah's blood froze. Non-combatants sheltered there. "If Danes broke through, go," she urged Magnus, who was torn between duties. He kissed her quickly, desperately, then ran with his best warriors. Sarah continued directing firefighting, but part of her attention tracked the battle's flow. Then she saw something that froze her blood. Danish warriors breaking from main battle toward back settlement, toward slave quarters and granaries. If they burned food stores, the settlement would face starvation even in victory. "Keep water moving," she called, then ran toward threatened buildings. She reached granaries as 6 Danish raiders arrived with torches and axes, intent on destruction. "Looking for something?" she called, stepping into their path. The scarred leader grinned nastily. A pretty Saxon come to play. Not Saxon, and not playing. She led them where she wanted, toward the building she knew best, with loose floorboards concealing old escape tunnels. "Doesn't matter what you are," the raider said, raising his torch. "You'll burn pretty." But as he moved to set fire, Sarah vanished through what looked like solid floor into tunnels beneath. She'd prepared for this, tunnels stocked with oil-soaked rags and kindling. Lighting them from below created illusion of burning granary while protecting it. Confused Danes found themselves surrounded by smoke with no clear target. In panic, they struck at shadows, hitting each other more than enemies. From hidden position, Sarah used building knowledge to strike and disappear repeatedly. She wasn't strong enough for direct combat, but didn't need to be, just confuse and delay until help arrived. Help came as Magnus, with reinforcements. The granaries? Safe. 6 raiders in smoke, blind and panicked. The skirmish was brief, but larger battle wasn't going well. More Danish ships had appeared. Sven had brought every warrior he could muster. "We're outnumbered 3-1, Magnus said grimly. Father's plan assumed 3 ships, not this fleet. Then we need new plans. Sarah was covered in soot, clothes torn, but eyes burned with determination. And I have one. Dangerous, requiring trust. Tell me, the harbor mouth looks wide, but there's a reason fishing boats enter only from east. Sarah explained as they crouched behind cover. Not rocks, ice shelves from the storm, wedged between underwater pillars. From surface water looks clear. But below, the Danes don't know. Their ships sit right over the worst. How does that help? We can't lower ships onto ice. Sarah's smile turned dangerous. No, but we can raise ice to them. The harbor chains support ropes. If cut underwater at the right moment, the chain falls, strikes ice shelves. Impact should dislodge them, send them up into Danish hulls. Magnus stared. You want to swim under harbor? In winter, under enemy ships, to cut probably frozen chain supports. I'm the best swimmer here, and small enough to move between pillars unseen. It's suicide. It's hope. Magnus, without something soon, they'll overrun us through numbers. Your father's wounded. Half our warriors down. This might be our only chance. He looked toward harbor, where Danish reinforcements kept arriving. She was right. I'll do it, he said. No, you're needed here, and your leg. The water's too cold, currents too strong. It must be me. He wanted to argue, but knew she was right. His injury, manageable on land, would be fatal liability in freezing water. How long? If everything goes perfectly, quarter hour to reach chains, cut them, return. She didn't mention everything that could go wrong. And if you don't return? She touched his face gently. Then remember, I chose this. For the first time I got to choose. Their kiss tasted of smoke and desperation and transcendent love. Then Sarah moved through shadows toward water's edge, discarding noble clothes for a simple shift, waterproof pouch with sharp knives over her shoulder. The water drove breath from her lungs with cold beyond description. For a moment, muscles seized and she thought she'd drown before beginning. But training took over. Years swimming all weather had prepared her body. She forced slow breathing, purposeful movement. Underwater was alien and terrifying. Sound muffled, direction confusing. The harbor chain stretched into murky depths like a sea serpent. Following required swimming deeper than ever before. Pressure built in ears and chest. Lungs burned for air. There, support pillars, thick posts, driven deep, massive ropes wrapped around them holding defensive chain. First rope was arm-thick and frozen stiff. Her knife seemed pitiful against it, but she sawed desperately. Above, dark silhouettes of Danish ships cut water like whale bellies. If spotted, the rope parted with a snap, sending vibrations through water. 1 down, 3 remaining. Lungs screamed for air. But surfacing exposed her to Danish archers.